Good morning, afternoon, and evening, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to the Global Brief by OneRead.news. Today we're going to do something a little different. We're going to play doctor. We're going to treat the entire planet like a patient on the operating table. And right here, we've got the chart. It's filled with all the big headlines from August 6, 2025. Now, I want you to think of these not as just random news stories, but as vital signs. Our job together is to use these diagnostics to figure out, well, how's our world really doing?
So that really is the big question, isn't it? The one we're all trying to answer. How healthy is our world today? I mean, is it in fighting shape, ready to run a marathon? Or is it feeling a bit under the weather, maybe calling in sick? Or, and this is what we're here to explore, is it actually running a serious, system-wide fever that has all the specialists work?
To get that answer, we've got to check the vital signs. And we've gathered 18 key stories, 18 crucial data points, all from a single 24-hour cycle. Now, if you look at them one by one, they might just seem like chaos, right? A bunch of random, disconnected alerts pinging on your phone. But our job today is to be the diagnostician, to connect the dots and see the single, cohesive story they're all telling us. Because these aren't just headlines. Together, they paint a surprisingly clear picture of a planet under some serious stress. So, you ready to look at the chart with me? Let's dive in. Okay, here's our game plan, our 5-step checkup. First, we're going to take the planet's temperature. Look at this major geopolitical fever that's breaking out, where all the old rules seem to be unraveling. Then, we'll examine the painful symptoms, the very real human cost of that fever. After that, we check the world's immune response. How are countries reacting, defending themselves? Then we're going to look for the internal illnesses, the pressure that's building up inside of democracies. And we'll wrap it all up by checking the risk of a full-blown systemic shock. Let's start with that fever. So, first things first, the big picture diagnosis, a geopolitical fever. We're talking about the very bones of our world order. For decades, we've had this whole system of treaties, alliances, and even just unwritten rules of conduct that have kept things, well, for better or worse, kind of stable. You can think of it as the global rulebook, right? Written after World War II, updated a bit after the Cold War. It was never perfect, but it gave us guardrails. But right now, the patient's temperature is spiking because that entire system is showing signs of a really serious structural breakdown. And here we go, Exhibit A for our diagnosis. Today, Russia officially pulled out of the INF Treaty. Now, this isn't just some dusty piece of paper. This is the official death certificate for an entire era of security. You have to remember, back in 1987, Reagan and Gorbachev signed this thing, and it was a huge deal. It got rid of an entire class of nuclear missiles, these terrifying weapons that could hit European capitals with just a few minutes of warning. It created a constant hair-trigger situation. The treaty was the safety valve that let everyone breathe a little easier. Now with it gone, the whole post-Cold War arms control system is pretty much in the grave. And that throws Europe right back into a dangerous new world of high-stakes, short-warning tension. And this unraveling isn't just about formal treaties. It's also happening with the unwritten rules of leadership. For ages, the US often played the part of the global mediator, or at least a very loud voice, especially in the Middle East. But when President Trump was asked about a potential Israeli move into Gaza, his response was basically, it's up to Israel. Now that might sound like just careful wording, but it signals something way deeper, a policy of outsourcing responsibility. This quote really nails it. The US gives a green light for action, but then asks everyone else to handle the mass and pay. It's a major step back from active engagement, and it leaves this big power vacuum, telling everyone that the old rules just don't apply anymore. This shift from leading from the front to, well, leading from the back has some very real consequences. Let's just look at the war in Ukraine. NATO is now officially coordinating these huge arms shipments. But if you pop the hood on this whole arrangement, you see something really interesting. You've got European countries, like the Netherlands, putting up the cash. We're talking over $1 billion. But that money is then used to buy mostly American-made weapons. So NATO effectively becomes the war's permanent logistical backbone. It institutionalizes the conflict, turning it into this semi-permanent feature of the landscape, all while the US gets to be the main supplier, without the same direct long-term financial or political strings attached. It's a whole new playbook for modern warfare. So, we've diagnosed the fever from 30,000 feet. But a fever isn't just some abstract number, right? It causes real painful symptoms. So now our diagnosis has to come down from the world of geopolitics and get right down to the ground to examine the devastating human price being paid for these big power shifts.
Let's just start with a single stark number. In the 24-hour period of August 5th, this was the number of Palestinians reported killed in Gaza: 83. Just let that sink in for a second. 83 individual human lives, each one a whole universe of stories, all gone in one day.
But the full story, the real horror of the diagnosis, is always in the details. Because of those 83 people, this number, 58, they weren't killed in what you might call a traditional combat situation. No, these were 58 people who were shot while they were just trying to get aid near food distribution sites. They were killed trying to feed their families. And on that very same day, another 8 people died from starvation. This is a symptom of something much deeper than just war. It's a sign of a complete collapse of society.
And this leads to a horrifying systemic breakdown. It's what some analysts are now calling a predictable kill zone. I mean, just pause and think about what that phrase actually means. The very system that's designed to save lives, the food aid line, has become a place where just the act of seeking help can get you killed. This isn't just a battlefield tragedy. This is a symptom of a catastrophic failure of logistics, of security, of basic humanity, all of it stemming from the larger war. It's what happens when the systems that are supposed to support civilian life don't just break down, they become actively dangerous. And as this terrible human cost just spirals and spirals, we're starting to see a fascinating symptom develop inside Israel itself. The political unity that's been backing the war is starting to show some really serious cracks. And what's amazing is where the dissent is coming from. It's not just protesters on the street, it's coming from the absolute heart of the security establishment. The former security chiefs, heads of intelligence, are now publicly breaking ranks. They're calling for an end to the war, and they're questioning if it's even sustainable or what its strategic goals are. When the very architects of a country's security strategy start ringing the alarm bells, you know the system is under incredible internal strain. And these symptoms, they are contagious. Let's shift our focus for a second over to Uganda, which is quietly turning into a global pressure cooker. It's on track to host 2 million refugees. 2 million. And get this, they're not just fleeing one crisis. No, they're pouring in from 3 separate massive conflicts in neighboring Sudan, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and South Sudan. So Uganda's basically absorbing the human fallout from an entire region in turmoil. But here's the real kicker. At the exact same time this is happening, the international humanitarian funding for Uganda is being cut. Dramatically. More people, less money. It is a textbook recipe for a future humanitarian disaster, born directly out of today's neglect.
Okay, so we've seen the fever, and we've examined the symptoms. In any patient, the next thing you look for is the immune response, right? How is the body fighting back? Well, faced with this feverish, unstable world, nations are doing the same thing. They're mounting their own defenses. We're seeing the global equivalent of antibodies being produced. Countries are rearming, new alliances are popping up like white blood cells rushing to a threat, and rivals are constantly poking and prodding each other, trying to figure out where the new red lines are drawn. Here is a perfect example of testing those new boundaries. An explosive drone, it's Russian-made, is launched from Belarus. It then deliberately flies into the airspace of Lithuania, which you'll remember is a NATO country. Now, this was no accident. This was a carefully choreographed test. The playbook is crystal clear. You launch the drone to send a message. You cross into rival territory to test their defenses and see how fast they react. And this is the crucial part. You do it all with just enough plausible deniability that you don't trigger an all-out war. It's a deliberate stress test of NATO's famous Article 5 collective defense, a calculated poke to see just how much pressure the system can take before it snaps. And this immune response is kicking in all over the place and in some really surprising ways. Let's look at Germany. Military recruitment is up 28% this year. Now, for most countries, that's just an interesting stat. For Germany, that is a psychological earthquake. You have to remember, Germany's entire modern identity since 1945 has been built on a foundation of pacifism. It's so central they have a word for it, Verganheitsbewältigung,
coming to terms with the past. What we're seeing now is a historic pivot, what their own chancellor calls a Zeitenwende, or a turning of an era, a fundamental shift away from never again war toward we must be prepared for war. It's a direct immune response to the new threats that they see on their doorstep. And this historic rearming is not just happening in Europe. The same immune response is flaring up in the Pacific. Australia just announced a massive $6.5 billion deal to buy advanced stealth frigates from Japan. And just like with Germany, who's selling is just as important as who's buying. This is Japan's largest military export deal since its own post-World War II pacifist constitution was reinterpreted. So stop and think about what's really happening here. This is not just an arms sale. This is two of America's biggest allies in the region, both with these deep-seated pacifist histories, now creating a united military-industrial front. It is a massive strategic realignment in the Pacific. And then you have a country like Ukraine, where their very survival depends on navigating this crazy, shifting landscape. President Zelensky is holding talks with President Trump, desperately trying to lock down the weapons and the sanctions he needs to survive. But he's doing it in an American political climate that is incredibly volatile and deeply polarized. I mean, can you imagine having to plead your case for survival while the very ground beneath your feet is constantly shaking? For Ukraine, every single phone call, every press conference, it isn't just diplomacy. It's a high-stakes tightrope walk over a political canyon, where one tiny misstep could be absolutely fatal. So far we've looked at the planet's external fever and its immune response. But, any good doctor knows that external stressors, they can cause internal illness. All these pressures, the collapsing treaties, the wars, the new arms races, they're like a virus that attacks the body politic. They find all the pre-existing weaknesses, the hairline fractures in a society, and they inflame them. This section is our diagnosis of that internal illness, democracy itself under duress. And here we find a really fascinating and kind of troubling universal theme. Pop quiz. What do Islamabad, Pakistan, and Austin, Texas have in common today? On the surface, you'd say absolutely nothing. But look closer. Look at the tactic. In Islamabad, the government bans public gatherings to shut down protests by Imran Khan's opposition party. In Austin, the state government issues arrest warrants for opposition lawmakers who literally fled the state to block a bill they were against. In two completely different political systems, thousands of miles apart, we see the exact same symptom. The tools of government, the rules and laws themselves, being turned into weapons to sideline and shut down political opposition. And this internal illness, it's also evolving. Authoritarian governments are developing a whole new toolkit. Just take what's happening with Hong Kong. The government is canceling the passports of pro-democracy activists who have fled overseas. Okay, that's not totally new, but they are going a chilling step further. They're also making it illegal for anyone, anywhere on the planet to give them any kind of financial support. This is the 21st century authoritarian toolkit in action. It's an attempt to make physical borders totally irrelevant, to control not just the person's body inside your country, but their movement and their very ability to survive, no matter where on earth they run. But it's not all doom and gloom on the democracy ward. Sometimes the patient shows signs of recovery. For a little bit of a counterpoint, let's look at Bangladesh. After a massive popular uprising toppled the last government in 2024, the country was just kind of in limbo. But now we have a clear path forward. There's an interim government, it's led by the respected Nobel laureate Muhammad Yunus, and it's in place. And, as this timeline shows, they have set a firm date for national elections in early 2026. Now, this isn't a cure, not by a long shot, but it is a treatment plan, and it's a hopeful, tangible sign of democratic resilience. And for our last case of internal illness today, we have a move that is just breathtakingly obvious in its strategy. Peru's government is publicly talking about withdrawing from the American Convention on Human Rights. Okay, why would they do that? Well, at the exact same time, their Congress is pushing a law that would grant amnesty for past human rights atrocities. It's a simple, cynical, two-step play. Step 1, you fire the referee. You get rid of the international court that has the power to rule your amnesty law illegal. Step 2, you commit the foul. You pass the law. It's a strategy designed to achieve what you could call preemptive impunity. All right, for our final diagnostic, we need to zoom all the way out. We've looked at the fever, the symptoms, the immune response, the internal illness. But what happens when all of these things are happening at the same time? When the patient's entire body is under stress, you start to worry about a major systemic shock, a heart attack, a stroke. Globally, when all of our geopolitical, human, and political systems are all inflamed at once, the very foundations we all rely on, the economy, supply chains, even the planet's physical systems, they all begin to show cracks.
And here is a perfect, tangible example of that fragility. An earthquake in Chile has caused a tunnel to collapse at the El Tenede mine. Now, what makes this global news is that this isn't just any mine. It is the world's largest underground copper mine. And copper is basically the circulatory system of the entire green energy transition. You cannot build a wind turbine or a solar panel, an electric car, or a modern power grid without tons and tons of it. So this one localized geological event in Chile sends a tremor through the entire global supply chain that our green future is being built on. It's just a stark reminder of how interconnected and fragile everything is.
We're also seeing this globalization of problems. The United States has just finalized a deal with Rwanda, which has agreed to accept up to 250 deportees, people who might have no connection to Rwanda at all. This kind of echoes a similar, though legally messy, arrangement that the UK has been trying to set up. And what it points to is a new trend in global politics. Wealthy nations trying to physically export their complex and politically explosive immigration challenges to other countries, often in the developing world. It's effectively outsourcing the problem, and it raises a whole new bunch of thorny questions about global responsibility and the nature of asylum. But what if the cracks start to appear in the most fundamental system of all? A system so basic, so universal that we don't even think of it as a system. What happens if the very concept of time itself begins to wobble?
I know, it sounds like the plot of a sci-fi movie, but it is actually happening. Scientists have confirmed that the Earth's rotation is accelerating just a tiny bit, and it's partly because melting polar ice caps are changing the planet's balance, like a figure skater pulling in their arms. Our days are getting shorter by tiny fractions of a second. It's not enough for you and me to notice, but it's enough to throw our super precise global systems, from GPS satellites to financial markets, out of sync with our atomic clocks. And so, for the first time ever, the world's official timekeepers are seriously debating whether to introduce a negative leap second to get our clocks back in line with the planet. It is a wonderfully weird final symptom, and a pretty profound reminder that our entire complex, high-tech global civilization ultimately depends on the stable, predictable mechanics of one spinning ball in space. So, the checkup is done. The chart is full. What's the final diagnosis for August 6th, 2025? Well, it's this. We have a patient presenting with a high geopolitical fever as the old international order breaks down. This fever is causing acute systemic inflammation, which is manifesting as terrible human suffering. And the patient's natural immune response, rearming and forming new alliances, has been triggered, but that response is creating its own set of unpredictable side effects and new complications.
That's our diagnosis based on the vital signs from just a single day. Which leaves us, and you, with the most important question of all. If this is the health of our world today, what in the world is the prescription for tomorrow? Follow us on Spotify and YouTube to listen to this podcast every morning at 8 a.m. GMT. We sincerely hope that by bringing you just the facts, free from bias and emotional spin, we've helped you understand today's world just a little bit better. Your support helps us in our mission to keep doing just that. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll be back with more headlines for you tomorrow morning at 0800 GMT. Until then, keep smiling and making this world a better place for everyone.